The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on Samuel Morrison's ranch as he worked to repair the fence line that separated his property from the vast, untamed wilderness beyond. It was the summer of 1867, and the frontier was a powder keg of tension between settlers and the Apache tribes who had called this land home for generations. Samuel knew the risks of ranching this far from the nearest town, but the land was good, the water was plentiful, and a man could build something here if he was careful and kept his wits about him. He was a widower of 2 years, his wife Margaret having succumbed to fever during their first winter on the ranch. They'd never had children, so Samuel lived alone with his cattle, his horses, and the constant awareness that he was always just one mistake away from disaster. But loneliness was a small price to pay for the dream of building something that was truly his own. It was late afternoon when he first saw them approaching. 2 figures on horseback, moving slowly across the scrubland toward his ranch house. Samuel's hand instinctively moved to the rifle he kept nearby, but something made him pause. As they drew closer, he realized they were women, Apache women, and unlike any he'd seen before. They were enormous, both of them standing well over 6 feet tall even when they dismounted, with broad shoulders and powerful builds that spoke of warrior blood. They stopped about 30 yards from where Samuel stood, their horses looking as exhausted as their riders. One of them raised a hand in a gesture that was neither threatening nor submissive, simply acknowledging his presence. Samuel could see now that they were young, perhaps in their early 20s, and despite their imposing size, there was something desperate in their posture. The taller of the 2 spoke in broken English, her voice deep and steady. "Water. Food. We trade." She held up a beautifully crafted leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. Every bit of frontier wisdom Samuel had ever learned screamed at him to refuse, to send them away, or better yet, to reach for his rifle. The Apache and the settlers were locked in a brutal conflict, and showing kindness to the enemy could get a man killed. But as he looked at these 2 exhausted women, their lips cracked from thirst and their horses barely able to stand, he found himself unable to turn them away. "No trade necessary," Samuel heard himself say. "Water's free, and I've got food enough to spare." The 2 sisters, for he could see now they must be sisters, their features too similar to be otherwise, exchanged glances of surprise. They'd clearly expected rejection or violence, not hospitality. Slowly, cautiously, they approached. Samuel led them to the well and watched as they drank deeply, first giving water to their horses before taking any for themselves. That simple act of putting their animals first told him something about their character. When they'd had their fill, he gestured toward his cabin. Inside, he prepared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and salt pork, everything he had that was ready to eat. The sisters sat at his rough-hewn table, their eyes constantly scanning the room, looking for threats or traps. But Samuel simply placed the food before them and stepped back, giving them space. They ate with the desperate hunger of people who hadn't had a proper meal in days. As they ate, the taller sister began to speak, her English improving as she relaxed. Her name was Nashota, which she said meant twin in her language. Her sister was Halona, meaning fortunate. They had been separated from their people during a cavalry raid 3 days prior. Their band had scattered into the mountains, and they'd been trying to find their way back when their supplies ran out. Samuel listened, saying little. He learned that they were daughters of a war chief, that their size and strength had made them legendary among their people, and that they'd both trained as warriors from childhood. They spoke of their homeland, of sacred mountains and ancient hunting grounds, of a way of life that was being destroyed piece by settlers like himself. As the sun began to set, Samuel knew he faced a decision. The smart thing would be to send them on their way before dark, to minimize his risk. But their horses were in no condition to travel, and night in the desert could be fatal even for experienced Apache warriors. "You can sleep in the barn," he said finally. "Your horses need rest, and so do you. Leave at first light." Nashota studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for deception or hidden motives. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "You are not like other white men we have met." "Maybe," Samuel replied. "Or maybe I'm just a fool who doesn't want 2 deaths on his conscience." That night, Samuel slept fitfully, his rifle close at hand, half expecting to wake with a knife at his throat. But when morning came, he found the sisters already up, tending to their horses and preparing to leave. Nashota approached him as he emerged from the cabin. "You have shown us honor when you could have shown us death," she said formally. "This will be remembered." She pressed something into his hand, a small carved stone, smooth and warm from being held. It bore the image of a bird he didn't recognize. "If you are ever in danger from our people, show them this. It is the mark of our clan. It may save your life." Then they were gone, riding north toward the mountains, sitting straighter in their saddles than they had the day before. Samuel watched until they disappeared from view, then returned to his work, trying to convince himself that he'd done the right thing. 24 hours later at dawn, Samuel woke to a sound that turned his blood to ice. Voices. Dozens of them, speaking in Apache. He rushed to his window and felt his heart stop. His ranch was completely surrounded by Apache warriors. He counted at least 70, maybe more, all armed with rifles, bows, and lances. They sat on their horses in perfect silence, forming a complete circle around his property. At the front of the group was an older man wearing the regalia of a chief, his face painted for war. And on either side of him sat Nashota and Halona, looking just as fierce as the warriors around them. Samuel's hands shook as he loaded his rifle. This was it, then. The sisters had led their people back to him, and now he would pay for his foolishness with his life. He had perhaps a dozen bullets. He might take a few of them with him, but the end was inevitable. He stepped out onto his porch, rifle in hand, determined to die with dignity at least. The morning sun cast long shadows across the assembled warriors, and the silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional snort of a horse or the whisper of wind through the grass. The chief raised his hand and spoke in Apache, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. Nashota translated, her voice loud enough for Samuel to hear. "My father, Chief Nantage, says that you showed honor to his daughters when you could have shown them death. You gave them food and water and asked nothing in return. You let them rest in safety when the night could have killed them. This is not the way of the white man we have known." Samuel stood frozen, not understanding where this was going but not daring to interrupt. Nashota continued, "My father says that because of this, you are now under the protection of our clan. Any Apache who harms you or your property will answer to him. He has brought these warriors not to kill you, but to show you that his word is law among our people." Samuel's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen on the frontier. You helped the wrong person and you died, that was how it worked. But here stood 700 warriors, not as enemies, but as, what? Protectors. The chief spoke again, and Nashota translated. "My father asks if you will accept this protection, and in return, asks only that you remember that Apache are human beings, capable of honor, just as you showed honor to his daughters." Samuel's throat was tight as he responded. "Tell your father that I accept, and I'm honored. And tell him that I already knew Apache were human beings capable of honor. That's why I helped his daughters." When this was translated, something changed in the chief's face. The hardness softened just slightly, and he nodded with what might have been respect. He spoke briefly, and the warriors began to disperse, not all at once but in groups, riding off in different directions. But before they left, each warrior rode past Samuel's porch. Some simply nodded. Others touched their hands to their hearts. A few left small gifts, a knife here, a carved piece of wood there, a string of beads. It took nearly an hour for them all to pass, and when they were gone, Samuel stood alone on his porch, surrounded by tokens from 700 warriors, his life forever changed. The chief was the last to leave. He rode up to the porch, and for a moment, the two men simply looked at each other across the divide of culture, language, and war. Then the chief reached into his pouch and pulled out a magnificent eagle feather, bound with leather and beads. He leaned down and handed it to Samuel. "Brother," he said in English, perhaps the only English word he knew. Then he turned and rode away, his daughters riding beside him. Samuel never saw them again, but word spread quickly across the frontier. The crazy rancher who had Apache protection. The man who'd fed 2 Apache sisters and somehow lived to tell about it. Some called him a traitor. Others called him a fool. But Samuel Morrison lived on that ranch for another 40 years. And in all that time, though Apache raids continued throughout the region, his property was never touched. He kept the eagle feather above his door, and the carved stone in his pocket until the day he died. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, he would sit on his porch and remember the morning 700 warriors surrounded his ranch, not to bring death, but to deliver a message that honor, when shown, creates ripples that can change the course of lives. The frontier was a hard place, full of hard people and harder choices. But Samuel learned that sometimes, the hardest choice, to show mercy when vengeance is expected, to offer kindness when cruelty is the norm, can be the one that saves not just lives, but souls. His act of simple humanity toward two exhausted women had created an alliance that defied all the rules of frontier warfare, proving that even in the darkest times, compassion can build bridges where hatred only builds graves. Years later, when Samuel was an old man, a young Apache warrior appeared at his door. He spoke English well and said he was Nashota's son, come to pay respects to the man who had saved his mother's life and, in doing so, had shown him that not all white men were enemies. He stayed for 3 days, and Samuel taught him about ranching, while the young man taught Samuel about Apache customs and beliefs. On the day he left, the young warrior said something Samuel never forgot. "My mother says that day you fed them, you were hungry yourself. You gave them the last of your supplies. She wanted you to know she knew, and that's why the protection was given. Not just because you helped, but because you gave when you yourself had little." Samuel had never mentioned that detail to anyone, had tried to hide how bare his cupboards were that day. But Nashota had seen, had understood, and had told her father. The protection hadn't been just for kindness, but for sacrifice. That, Samuel realized, was the real lesson. Anyone can be generous when they have plenty. But true honor comes from giving when you yourself are in need, from showing humanity when you have every reason not to. And somehow, in that one moment of decision, he had stumbled onto a truth that changed everything. That we are all more alike than different, and that kindness, even in small doses, has power beyond measure.